That was awesome. Now I'm going to start the recording. So I know some of you just joined. I'm going to, in a minute, put Sabrina's bio that you missed in the chat so you can catch up. But this is our special guest. And yes, that was beautiful. I agree, Sam. And those of you who are new, make sure you put in and I'll send the spell in the follow-up email for everyone that signed up to be here so that you can see it. It was a beautiful way to start. Perfect. Thank you, Sabrina. I just want to start our conversation. And, reciprocity is, the peace economy, the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational economy. It's reciprocity, but we get confused about what that word means. And what I think you do so well is kind of unpack that in relationship to those of us who live in the empire and how contorted it's become in ways we don't even recognize. And so if we could start there with what is reciprocity and where does it get contorted?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. And yeah, I think there's an article that I wrote, which is how I guess you and I came into contact. It was called Reciprocity as Relational Responsibility. And I wrote this article because I myself was moving through my own processing of how I had come to, how I have now come to understand what reciprocity means. What I was noticing is that folks would be talking about reciprocity as a form of transaction or exchange. And the word reciprocity would be almost just a nicer way of saying, how do we exchange in this moment? And so I started to sit with that for a while and ask myself, is this really what reciprocity means? Or how else could we see reciprocity? What are the underlying assumptions that might be shaping the way we speak about reciprocity? And so that moved me into a lot of deep reflection where I kind of came to three main ways in which we assume, or three main assumptions that we make of reciprocity. The first was that we assume that reciprocity must be direct and individual, meaning that it is a one-to-one exchange where one person gives to another person who receives. The plant that we eat from is the plant that we should water. So it's this idea of direct exchange. Another thing that we assume about reciprocity is that it's time-bound, meaning that it's something that has to be balanced, a debt of sorts that has to be balanced with speed and immediacy. And even when we're thinking about reciprocity beyond the form of compensation, we still tend to think about it as something that needs to be direct and needs to happen within a particular moment of time. And so that was another one that came up for me. And then the third one was this idea of equal exchange or even exchange, that what I give to you must equal to what you give back to me in some sort of value. So whether or not we're talking about monetary, we're still measuring a sense of value. And we're seeing, well, I gave you this much and you only gave me this much. That doesn't feel fair. That doesn't feel as reciprocal. And so this is where I sort of started my own inquiry around what reciprocity might mean if we were to say goodbye to some of those assumptions and if we were to play in another space. And so, yeah, that's kind of what my journey has been. And I've come to feel pretty confident around the language of reciprocity as relational responsibility. I also want to credit and name Robin Wall Kimmerer as an author of the book Braiding Sweetgrass, but also The Serviceberry. I actually hadn't read The Serviceberry as I was writing this. I had found a quote which really spoke to me. But afterwards, a friend of mine gifted me the book and I read it and I was like, this is exactly the type of thing that I was sitting with and feeling, and it was so beautifully communicated through the story of The Serviceberry. And there was one piece I think that really resonated with me. I talked about like when you take from, or when a plant gifts you something, a berry, even a few months ago, I was thinking and talking about reciprocity as I pour water on that plant and I do something to gesture that I'm grateful. And thank you so much. And I'm not saying that that's an incorrect practice, that we don't need to be grateful for the gifts that we receive. But I think what I'm now playing with is more of an expanded imagination that understands our interconnectedness and that doesn't view us as in this direct one-to-one kind of relationships, but understands the holistic picture and sees us as part of an ecosystem, as a web of relationships where I'm benefiting from these berries. And maybe my responsibility moving forward is just to care more for the land and to notice that there's a tree over here that's really dry. And maybe I need to water that tree instead of watering this bush that gifted me the berries. So it's offering us a more expanded lens on what responsibility and reciprocity could look like.
Well, one of the things that I like that you say, though, is that when you're like pulling back the lens, is in pulling back the lens, recognizing all the things that you are gifted with that you're not aware of. You know, like when you say reciprocity and what you're doing, you know, one of the things I really love that you talk about is like, wow, I received this roof over my head and I received this food I'm eating today. There's a sense that of the starting point of the recognition of all the gifts that make up our lives that are so abundant.
Yeah.
And that we narrow ourselves down into this moment instead of living in the abundance. And I don't know if you can speak to that. I just find that beautiful how you pull the lens back.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me on that, Jodie. I think when we think again, it kind of goes back to this idea of this time-bound concept of reciprocity, because when the so-called first gift is given or exchange is made, an offer is gestured, we think it starts there. And then we're like, well, what do I get in return for the thing that I've given? But we don't actually look back and say, well, what have I been receiving? What is my responsibility to all that I have received? That now perhaps what is actually happening is I am acknowledging my positionality. I am acknowledging my context. I'm acknowledging what is within my capacity to offer and share in this moment. And that is what I'm doing. And I trust. I think the other really important part, Jodie, we had a conversation about this earlier, is trust is such a critical part of this as well, because we have to trust that we will be taken care of. By practicing relationship, we will be taken care of. And that we don't have to ask for these immediate forms of exchange, but we can trust that when we practice a responsible way of being, when we offer our gifts, that others feel that, and that is noticed, and that is, that comes back to us. But also it has perhaps already been gifted to us. So it's really shattering these ideas of, I guess, the time construct that we're thinking from this point forwards, rather than, well, what have I already gathered? What have I already gained? What have I already been gifted?
Well, and I think that trust part, I'm just going to use a little the war economy, peace economy models that we use. The war economy has been, undermining the peace economy for so long. One of the things we don't talk about is that the war economy has eroded those trust possibilities, that part of what it's eroding is that sense of trust and this intergenerational trauma that so many people suffer under that erodes trust. So, how do we recognize that the trust has been broken, yet the capacity to trust is still present? And that we create that in the way we are, that capacity to trust.
Yeah, I think the conditioning in the system wires us towards scarcity thinking and hoarding behaviors and individualist behaviors. And so we're so deeply steeped in a culture that continues to reinforce those logics. And we practice and play into it because everything around us is telling us that this is how it has to be. Don't trust your neighbor. Don't trust the person outside. And because we've designed like economic models that are on transaction, we have trouble imagining beyond that. And so I would encourage us to play with experimenting with what does that feel like. Just the other day, I had asked a friend of mine who has been doing some really beautiful work in batik. And I had asked them if they would be able to share their practice with me. And they generously offered to gift me an experience in batik. And I immediately was like, how much do I like what I asked, what can I do to make you feel resourced? That was my question. How can I ensure that you feel resourced in this moment to give this? But I was still thinking also from this lens of immediate time bound, like what can I do right now? And they said, actually, I'm sort of playing with this idea of reciprocity beyond yeah, beyond these time horizons that we kind of these immediate time horizons. And so I said, oh, that's really funny because I actually just wrote about that. So when it didn't even occur to me in that moment, I was thinking about, you know, how can I make you feel resourced? I was like, I would love to play with that right now. Why don't we do that? So that's where we are, is that the understanding, the mutual understanding between us is that they are going to gift me this experience and share their knowledge with me in a way because we've built a relationship. And there is a trust that is down the road when and if my own capacity is there, that if they need something and they ask for it, that I will show up to support them and to offer whatever I can. And so it doesn't, I think it requires us to have trust. It also requires us to be honest with ourselves about our capacity and not to feel shamed for that. I think one of the pieces that I mentioned in the article that I think is really important to name was in reference to another friend of mine who she'd given me consent to write about this story, but she had gone on a trip to her homelands and had an intention to work in service of some of the permaculture projects and the land regeneration projects that were happening on the ground and stewarded by Indigenous folks. So she had taken a motorcycle to the destination, and then as she got off the motorbike, burned her leg. And so it rendered her completely incapable of contributing in the way that she had imagined. And in that moment, there was this crisis inside, feeling like I had come here to offer my gifts and to give in this way, and now I don't have the capacity to do that anymore. And now the people that I was going to go support are having to take care of me and support me. And so that, I think that's a really important exploration, is that as we're talking about reciprocity, we're not just speaking about it from the place of giving, but also your capacity to receive as well, and to be honest about the fact, the truth, that nothing is static, that conditions and contexts are always in flux and always changing. And so, yes, while I have agreed with my friend about this experience that she's going to gift me, she is aware as much as I am that our context and circumstances can change in the years to come, in the months to come, and that our ability to contribute in the ways that we had originally intended to might also be impacted by that. And that's an understanding. But then again, it might change again. And so we just continue to build and iterate upon this relationship of generosity and care. And I think that's where it truly stems from.
Well, and not having it be about the other, having it be about the field of generosity that you trust, that has nothing to do about where you gave. And it's that when you need, it will be there. And, you know, one of the things you spoke to is like, when you need, can you receive? Because a lot of the war economy, peace economy work is we don't operate to need. And when we can operate to need, it takes away so much waste. Because there's, even in our relationships, we operate out of our ideas about things instead of letting need arise. I watched even at CODEPINK, someone was exhausted this weekend and they were making things nobody needed. They just thought they were needed. You know, it's like, wait till the knock, you know, because then it will be exhausting because need hasn't arisen. So you do talk about care. And a little earlier, you said that the community needed to care for her. But as people who care, when we're in caring, it doesn't feel like we need to do it. It feels like what flows abundantly from us and also alivens our hearts and is actually a joyful act when it's in flow of relationship, when it is in flow of need, when it is in flow of relationship. So I think care has been distorted a lot. It's been distorted in gendered relationships and in how we see, you know, certain people, how, you know, in the way you're looking at like making sure receiving and giving or in reciprocity both have same value, you know, like can you receive, and then the other is care when it's expected is different than when care is flowing.
Yeah, thank you. I also really appreciate you naming that because, see, I think this is how deeply embedded it is in our language and our vocabulary. I didn't even catch that I said that. But yes, exactly. I think there was no obligation to care. It is an expression of how we exist in relationship. And we're always receiving care. I think, again, so much of these ideas are shaped by the logic of separation, too, which keeps us thinking about the individual and keeps us disconnected from relationships with the land and understanding how we are nature, how we are always in these interconnected ways of being, and that we are being fed all the time by the air, by the water, by the land, by you know, our more than human kin that are pollinating the flowers, and we're always in receiving. And we have a responsibility on this planet too, which is to be a participant in this web of care. And I think we know that when we care, it ends up flowing back because that's just how the world works. And so, yeah, it isn't coming. My comment there wasn't about my friend having this Indigenous community needing to care for her, but they did end up caring for her and offering and extending that care while she was expecting to give. And yeah, I appreciate you naming that.
Yeah. So the can you describe like your work at Cause and Effect? Because like cause and effect is one of the things that I think we live in a time where I don't know why, you know, cause and effect, which is really like living in relationship with reality, is so distorted. We see it with social media, it creates a distortion. I'm certainly in the war economy. There's no cause and effect. There's no, I murdered somebody and I'm responsible and accountable. You know, power gets to be pretty destructive and violent and there's no accountability. Yes, thank you, Valerie. Cause and effect is in the law of the universe. But we've got a bunch of rich people that are figuring out how to like weasel. I mean, it's an interesting thing about the war economy because there is something in capitalism that creates a buffer between cause and effect and those with capital, which is very toxic and is part of what creates the pathology of the psychopathy that we are living inside of. I think it's a driving force for that psychopathy. So I want to understand cause and effect, if you could share that with us.
Sure. Yeah. First, I guess I'll share a bit about the name and how that came to be what it is now. And I think it's constantly emerging. But I came from an understanding and a noticing that We're always in a rush. We're always in a hurry to do and to and we act out of urgency. And when we are acting out of urgency, harm is caused because we tend to lean on patterns that replicate the same thing over and over again. These are deeply ingrained patterns, whether we're maybe not even aware of the choice that we're making, we're just doing something because that's how we've been taught to do it. So the pause was there because it offers this space, this gap between the thing and the action. And it gives us room to contemplate, room to reflect and ask, who else, how else, why, what else? And it offers the opportunity to make a different choice, a different decision. And so that's how pause and effect as an organization name came to be. And what we do is we actively work to decolonize the field of research and design by first reckoning with the ways in which coloniality has shaped coloniality. And when I say that, I'm also talking about war, slavery, imperial expansion, and the ways in which those logics have shaped what we know now as modern research and design. And I'm actually writing an article on this right now, but there are a plethora of ways in which our conception and understanding of research have been tainted by the military-industrial complex and by the colonial project. And so what we are doing is exposing that and then creating that space, that pause, that opportunity to really sit in the what if, what else, how else. And what if research was none of this? What if research was simply the humble pursuit of inquiry and knowledge? Then what is our responsibility to that knowledge? What does it mean to be in relationship with that knowledge? What does it mean to be in relationship with inquiry? And how do we practice from that place? And so we are, we develop programs and learning experiences and build community around some of these questions that take apart the colonial underpinnings of these fields.
Do you have an example you could share with us of?
Oh my gosh, so many.
Pick one.
Yeah.
Make it relational for us.
Okay. I think there's so many. My brain is spinning. I think the first thing I'll say is our understanding of research is that is this idea of neutrality and objectivity, that there is an objective neutral body that can inquire with this idea of separation. It's so deeply embedded that, and I think this stems from the way that colonizers and their administrators would go to different countries and observe the primitive behaviors of other people and start documenting their observations through their supremacist lens and through and they would use that and weaponize that research to inflict harm upon that population and to justify their own agendas. And so we still see this idea of neutrality and objectivity in research today. That's how research is done. What is it like to acknowledge that we are not objective people? We are not neutral people. And how do we practice research in a way that honors and understands the ways that we are implicated within the very systems that we seek to understand? I think this idea of separation keeps us thinking that we are not implicated in the system. So we can remain separate from it and go observe what's happening here or understand what's happening in this condition without actually seeing our own responsibility within that. So when I talk about research in the context of reciprocity too, we're not talking about this as the monetary compensation that people, so-called researchers, are giving to the so-called participants for thank you for your time, but rather understanding what is the responsibility of the researcher with the knowledge that you have now received. Now that you have received what you have received, what do you do with that? How do you hold that knowledge? And how do you move differently because of the knowledge that you've received? That is reciprocity. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we are encouraging folks to think about, working with this piece on like taking apart or understanding the colonial foundations of how modern research is shaped, and then asking ourselves how we can move away from that.
So basically, you're the antidote to AI. So, I mean, what I'm hearing you is that, when we look at AI and people are starting to use it and it's infiltrating everything, and I call it crack cocaine, it is replicating everything that is bad. Like, it is replicating imperialist, colonialist, white, male, patriarchal dogma, positioning in answering every question, that is replicating it faster and faster and faster. And it's so biased also. So it, like, not in the cause and effect world. It's not in the cause and effect world. It's in a world of connecting pieces of information that may not even be relational. That's why I always say it's like hallucinating. So yet it's fascinating that really smart people think it's like this tool that is going to solve all the world's problems. And I know the world's problems are super complicated and we live in mega crises, but in the solving problems with the master's tools, this couldn't be more of an outrageous process. Now, as with all things, fire can burn down a house, and fire was one of the greatest inventions, like how to have a relationship with it. And what I hear you saying is how to have a relationship with information that serves life. So you're talking about research that gets co-opted by the war economy, capitalism, to serve its needs. And that we, when we read the information, forget to read from the place of, this is a manufactured consent I'm entering, and how do I read with an ear of, this was created to manufacture my consent for the empire, colonialism, power, and the people with money. And Sabrina, why I really love what you're doing and why it fits so well with this peace economy work is, it is our work. As we get deeper into this work, and I'm sure as you recognize, it seems really simple when you start, but when you start to slowly unpack yourself and peel yourself off the war economy, the violence of it and how it influences your life and how it creates these patterns that we're not even aware of, that Sabrina and I can be mimicking as we even talk about it, and we can all do that. How do we continually peel ourselves off of the structure to be able to be in the space of cause and effect, inquiry, relationship? This is all about relationship. The reciprocity is like seeing that we want something back from that, like the thing that brings us into the narrow. It's all about using this lesson you're teaching about reciprocity of, like, how do we bring it back into the bigger, that capacity of being on the earth. The people that I work with in Brazil that just live on the earth with no money, and it's always giving back. They don't understand what money's for. They use it to make fire. So how do we be, it's more complicated for us, but it's like a good point to look at. It's like to be able to see the extreme. And one of the things you teach about, Sabrina, that I want to give you a chance to talk about is balance, and where to find the balance in these relationships. I think that's what you're talking about with your pause and effect of pause to find the place of balance, to find the place to stand, to see more. If that's my takeaway from talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jodie. Oh my gosh, there's so much there. I think the first thing that I want to speak to is, you had mentioned AI. And so I think it's something that could be relevant in this conversation. But I've spent some time reflecting on the difference between information and knowledge and wisdom. And I think those are really critical distinctions to make. AI can give you information. Maybe it's not all true, factual information, but it gives you a form of information. And what's happening right now is this regurgitation of information. People are regurgitating things. And we don't just do this on AI. I'm not going to just put it there, because we do this in every space all the time. Look at the words that you see, like everybody says all the time now. And do they really understand what it means? There is a difference between saying the right thing and understanding it because it lives in your bones, because you've spent time contemplating, because you've put it into practice. And there's something to be said about the somatics of change, the somatics of practice. When we are theorizing change or practice, it only goes so far. When we are actually in practice, there's the experience of what it feels like to do the thing, to be observed in doing the thing, all the other forces that are out there that your body could never understand if you were to just read about it. And so I think it's really important when we're talking about reciprocity, or we're talking about any of these other concepts, to think about what is the smallest scale, or maybe the middle scale, that we can practice at. For example, having a friend that I shared this with that was like talking about reciprocity with me in this other way was great, because it keeps me accountable and it invites us to practice in a different way. And now we're experimenting with something. I think being able to open ourselves up to experimentation is one of the ways in which we start to make this a bigger pattern and shift our way of being.
Which is why we say to practice the habits of peace, because in the practice, we learn so much, both about the addiction of the war economy, but also what it is to develop peace, what it is to cultivate peace. Even as we desire it so much, how are we cultivators? It reflects a lot back to us. So, in this, some of the things that you're saying is, speaks to, I think, the thing that we're trying to do here at the local peace economy, which is there's all this madness happening, especially with Trump. It's like the constant chaos of like everybody's in a drama that has nothing to do with reality. Most of it already happened, isn't going to affect us. I mean, there are things to be in relationship with it, just like being out in the streets and protecting your friends that are being picked up by ICE. That's a real thing, which to help you understand real violence and really what's happening with your tax dollars. But the rest is just a distortion. And I think you've mentioned a really good practice for all us to take away this week is that recognition of how do we look at reciprocity? How do we look at the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy piece? Like that space of generosity, the space of abundance that we live in. Sabrina saying, taking us back to looking like, oh, what have I been given? And here we just live in so much abundance, like each of us, no matter what it feels like, we live with a lot compared to billions of others on the planet. And we're starting at, maybe starting at the wrong place to understand reciprocity. And then what is information and what is wisdom? And you talked about the rushing, the pause that you created at the peace economy, bookmark. We have urgency. We have rush. It's rushing to wisdom, and I think that says the same thing as what you're saying with the pause and with the research. It's how do we pause and be present with what's actually happening, so then we can be wise. Instead of used by all this other madness, which as we practice it, given how intense this other is, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel very weird. But I love that your spell was to stay in the weirdness. So that invitation to all of us that was in the spell to stay in the weird. Sabrina, before we, break into like taking some of what you've said into our smaller conversations, what would you like to leave us with from your work, and what are you brewing right now? What are some drips of wisdom you could leave us with? And how can we engage with you or support you in any way?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. As you were talking, it just reminded me to share that this this idea of separation also wants this disconnection between mind and body. Just as much as it separates us from each other and separates us from the land, there's this idea of the mind-body split. And I think it is so important for us to not ignore what the body is saying and to actually sit with what emerges as we engage in practice. It's one thing to force yourself into practice, but it's another to be like, what is coming up for me here? Why is this feeling uncomfortable? Let me sit with that. Let me talk about it. Let me share and co-process with another being. Maybe let me even spend time with our more than human relatives and witness the way that they understand what reciprocity might look like. I think there's so much wisdom in teachings that surround us. And if we open ourselves up and we open our bodies up to receive that wisdom, there's just so much out there for us to learn from. So I think, yeah, part of the key takeaway here is not to ignore the body as we're moving through these practices of change, because the body is a huge indicator in the way that we've been conditioned, in the things that get in the way, but also it protects us, it keeps us safe. There's so much knowledge in the body. So yeah, this illusion of separation isn't just limited to the outside, it's also how we dissociate from ourselves.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you for being our guest today. Thank you for taking us deeply into this, how deeply we can go into one word and how much it has to reveal to us is what we're talking about itself.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to get in touch, I write a lot of content on LinkedIn, so you can follow me there, or you can also follow what we do through pauseandeffect.ca.
So I've put the Pause and Effect in the chat if you look up there under Sabrina's bio. And also I posted her article that is what brought me to her. And I'll put those in the follow-up email, or Marie will put them in the follow-up email along with the spell that was cast on us at the beginning. That was lovely. What a great way to start, instead of a poem, a spell. So, I want to break us into our groups, but first I want to say this is super important, because I know our hearts break and how hard it is, and it doesn't make anything better. But you know how we say the work we are doing, we are creating the future, because the war economy is cracking, it's going to destroy itself, it's going to fall. Well, it's really good things are happening. In Colombia, the Hague Group meeting, and really for the first time seeing governments of other countries come together to think of what they can do. The New York Times op-ed yesterday on genocide, when I always think I call it a whistleblower moment, when it's a true believer that just won't believe. When they break, when the whistleblower breaks, something is happening. So here, that op-ed in the New York Times was huge on the fact that it is now a genocide by somebody who studies it and somebody who has resisted with every ounce of their being. That's huge. Mandy Patinkin losing their minds by, how can any of us be Jewish and accepting this? How can we have witnessed and experience what happened to our ancestors and allow this to happen? Having those inside the system be doing the work is what all of your work has done. Because I always say, it's like being out there, we give others courage. We have to break open, we have to make the space for the others to be able to walk on. And so what I want to say to you with all my heart is just gratitude. Everybody's been here, you've been in the streets, you have not given up, even though our hearts get crushed every day with things we should never, ever have to bear. and that you've helped each other, you've shared with each other, and been to the streets together. It's like recognizing the abundance we live in. We must recognize the things that we've done, so that we, have the energy to do the next thing. That the things that we're going to be making an opportunity to go in your community is that Superman is about Gaza. I don't go to superhero movies. I don't believe in superheroes. I believe in the people. But just FYI, it's a good place to go bring your messaging around Palestine, because it's a totally weird audience. So I'm just going to use the weird from our spell today. It's a totally weird audience. It's a place to speak. For those of you in Southern California, we're going to Comic-Con because the Scream 7, fired one of the actors for saying Free Palestine. So we're going to be there, another weird audience to bring up Palestine to. It's always about going where the people aren't, really paying attention and rising it up and being surprised, being in the way Sabrina said, like being available to the information that's out there where it isn't. So there's a lot happening at CODEPINK, and Sam, thanks for posting BDS. Yes, our Airbnb campaign's really taking off across all our coalition partners, and we were successful once. So we feel like we can be successful again by keeping the pressure on there. They don't like their image tarnished. So let's do some tarnishings that make them uncomfortable. Make power uncomfortable is the one thing people can do. So, before we move into the small groups, just my deepest, deepest, deepest gratitude. So everything you invest in the peace economy is helping the war economy collapse without you having to take a sledgehammer. It's sledging itself. You're building a more beautiful future. So just a reminder of, if we don't build a more beautiful future, who will? It's us, right? And it's going to take breaking some addictions and some habits and building some new muscles. So I really, when we break into these smaller groups today, I'd love you to reflect on your experience of reciprocity, where you kind of see yourself, and in the space of pause, that space that can make you feel uncomfortable. What gets in the way? Maybe before you leave each other, what's a commitment you can have for each other this week, of maybe some extra pause moments, as our reciprocity back to Sabrina, of the whole world is better when we pause a little. Let's I'm gonna put you into your breakout rooms. As always, they will not be closed until the last one is until the last one leaves. Sometimes it's midnight with you guys. I'm seeing some things. Yes, Francesca Albanese for Nobel Peace Prize, even though Obama got one, so we don't even know what it means anymore, really. But yes, to celebrating those that have the courage to speak out, but remembering that's you. We all do it from the platform we are at. She does it from the platform she's at. You do it from the platform you are at. It is all meaningful. So please remember that. And I'm making a little bit bigger groups today, just so you have a chance to meet each other and talk about this really interesting subject. How do we step back and trust the universe that is so generous, and that we are building that fabric of trust ourselves? Love you all. Let me know if anybody needs help getting to where they're going. I think 4, 4, 2, 3. Kathy
You invited me to break out too. Are you okay if I join in? I'd be so curious to hear the conversation.
Of course. I'm actually going to move you to 3 because there's less people in there and they could probably love to have you. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Donna,
I'll
Tara,
stay
they're
for a
very
little bit.
talkative.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
so much. Okay.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks.
3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Quintana, you don't want to go anywhere, Beth, Kathy? You're welcome to join the conversations. Hi, Quintana.
Is
the-
it finished or do you have break rooms?
we had breakout rooms and I assigned you to one, but you disappeared. So I'm going to figure out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was
No, I'm
feeding
gonna-
the cat.
I'm going to assign you. Just one sec. Just
Okay, thank you,
one
Jodie.
sec. There. Oh,
Okay.
did you? There you go. You just have to say yes. There we go. Beth, do you want to go somewhere?
Hello, John Russell here. Are we back in plenary?
Okay. Bye, Jody. Bye, everybody. Good night. Hey, oh yeah, right. Night, night.
Right.
this in a press briefing.